So the LBI London Lecture Series is organized jointly by the Leo Baeck Institute and the German Historical Institute London. And it is always a great honor and a pleasure for us to work with the GHI. And I'm therefore very happy to let the Institute's director, Professor Christina von Hodenberg, extend her welcome to you now. So to you, Christina.
Thank you very much, Kinga. You know, the pleasure is all mine. So we love to collaborate with the Leo Baeck Institute, and we have done so for quite a number of years. Normally, we would have these lectures in our beautiful conference room at Bloomsbury Square, and it would be a pleasure to welcome you there. Maybe it works next time, but I think Zoom has its advantages too. Certainly, we will still be able to engage with Tobias Ebbrecht-Hartmann's ideas and his lecture, and I welcome him here very warmly. And often, you know, this enables people from all over Britain and all over the world even to listen to the lecture series. And I think with a topic like this, which is very much about audiovisual and modern media, it might make even more sense to be online and not just in person. So I'm looking forward to the lecture, and of course, you know, I'm looking forward to continuing our collaboration, Kinga. And back over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I can only second that. Thanks to you, Christina, and to your team at the German Historical Institute. As you know, we're always very much looking forward to all joint events with you and hope we'll have lots of them in the future. So let's get to today's topic, and let me give you a brief introduction to the scope and focus of our lecture series, and of course, an introduction to tonight's speaker, Dr. Tobias Ebbrecht-Hartmann. This year's lecture series is dedicated to the topic Popular Culture, Politics and Jews, and it delves into the rich world of German Jewish, European Jewish, and also US American popular culture, examining its manifold manifestations, political questions, and complex motivations in history. Understanding popular culture's normative sense on societal issues grants access to images, ideas, and attitudes that have resonated within the breadth of society. And I think we all agree that few other platforms have captured a global audience's attention more in recent years than the streaming services such as Amazon Prime, Apple Plus, and last and certainly not least, Netflix. Amongst the blockbusters presented on these online platforms, several productions featured televised interpretations of Jewish history and culture, and they have captured millions of viewers' attention with images and imaginations about what it means to be Jewish. The diverse range of series presenting melodrama or comedies set in different Jewish communities entail programs such as Amazon Prime's comedy, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, set in New York of the 1950s and 60s, the transnational drama Unorthodox, set in Berlin and New York of the early 2000s, or the Netflix soap opera Shtisel, about a Haredi family living in an ultra-Orthodox neighborhood in Jerusalem. The response to these productions has been divided ever since the characters entered the screen for the first time. On the one hand, pop culture was seen as a gateway to foster televised encounters with the lives of ultra-Orthodox Judaism, for example. And on the other hand, there were concerns about the presence of anti-Semitic stereotypes in these programs, and those have been voiced by several agents in the reception process. I'm therefore very grateful and incredibly excited for having Dr. Tobias Ebbrecht-Hartmann here tonight, who will engage with some of the complex issues surrounding the representation of ultra-Orthodoxy on the global streaming service Netflix. So I am indeed honored to welcome and to introduce Dr. Tobias Ebbrecht-Hartmann here on behalf of the LBI London tonight. And I don't think I exaggerate in saying that the film and media scholar Tobias Ebbrecht-Hartmann's work is groundbreaking in many respects. It is indeed very hard to reduce his diverse portfolio of academic publications and research projects into a very few short opening words. So please forgive me, Tobias, and please forgive me, dear guests, if I can only give a very condensed overview on his work today. Tobias Ebbrecht-Hartmann is currently a senior lecturer at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, working in the Department of Communication and Journalism at the DAAD Center for German Studies. He is an internationally renowned film scholar who did his PhD on the cinematic narration of the Holocaust at Freie Universität Berlin. His research since explores the complex borderlands between historical fact and cinematic fiction, the challenges inherent to commemoration in an increasingly digitized world, and transnational cultural encounters in the context of European cinema. Tobias has worked at several renowned German universities, such as the Film University Babelsberg Konrad Wolf in Potsdam and the Bauhaus University in Weimar. He was also awarded a fellowship of the International Institute for Holocaust Research at Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. Tobias Ebbrecht-Hartmann is currently involved with the International European Union-funded project, Visual History of the Holocaust, Rethinking Curation in the Digital Age. And this
come on.
Oops. And this project addresses the complex issue of how to digitally curate filmic records that bear witness to the darkest chapter in recent European history. Tobias Ebbrecht-Hartmann's academic publications include a wide range of German and English monographs and articles and book chapters, looking at film history, Holocaust commemoration, and modern visual representations of Jewish history and culture. Let me give you 3 recent examples from his truly diverse portfolio. The first one is a German publication, and the title translates into Transitions, Passages Through a German-Israeli History of Cinema, that was published in Berlin in 2014. In this book, Tobias presents a German-Israeli film history by means of exploring different facets of the long-standing relationship and exchange between German and Israeli film directors. The second title is an article published in Media and Culture Society in 2021, titled Commemorating from a Distance, the Digital Transformation of Holocaust Memory in Times of COVID-19. And this article is engaging with responses of Holocaust memorials and museums to the COVID-19 pandemic, and it explores different ways of experimentation with the potential of social media Holocaust memory. And finally, another book chapter, this time in an edited volume by Trevor Buffoni, dedicated to TikTok cultures in the United States. And here, Tobias has published an article with Tom Diven titled #Jewish TikTok, the Jew Talks Fight Against Anti-Semitism. And this book chapter is focused on a squad of Jewish American TikTokers who call themselves Jew Talks, who have decided to dedicate their accounts to combating anti-Semitism online by giving an insight into Jewish culture and tradition. And from this brief or maybe slightly lengthy insight into Tobias' work, you can tell that I could easily continue speaking about his exciting projects, but that is evidently not why you joined us tonight. So I'm very, very happy to hand over the stage to Tobias Ebbrecht-Hartmann, who will speak about another modern phenomenon, the fictional engagement with orthodoxy in Netflix series, in his talk, In Our Image, Meeting Our Ultra-Orthodox Other on Netflix. So, Tobias, to you.
Thank you very much, Kinga. That was a beautiful and very honoring and flattering introduction. Thank you very much for that. And yes, thank you very much to all of you for joining. And my apologies that I could not be in person in London. I was really looking forward to that, but unfortunately at the end, it turned out that I won't be able to travel. So I'm happy that we can do this on Zoom. I have to admit that my lecture will be less concise than Kinga's introduction. This is definitely really an experiment, work in progress. I don't know even if I'm really kind of looking at this topic from the researcher's perspective, although now after your introduction, I found that there are a lot of connections to my previous work, but actually it's much more that I'm really just a Netflix viewer who was fascinated when viewing these series. And when I was, when it was suggested to me maybe to speak about those series, I said yes, because I found this really a good opportunity to also critically review my own gaze. And this is actually also the topic of the way how I want to engage and share with this series and share my thoughts with you. Kinga already mentioned that that there were usually always quite controversial or different views when new series about ultra-Orthodox Haredi communities aired on these platforms, and a lot celebrated this as a great opportunity to create a bridge towards this these communities, which usually separate themselves somehow or are also separated from the secular parts of the society. And on the other hand, there was of course also concern how far this would intensify certain stereotypic perceptions of Jews, but also of these specific religious communities. My lecture is really not a lecture about the question how accurate these films are. It is also not really about the ultra-Orthodox, because I think I'm really not the right person to explain, and definitely not to judge about ultra-Orthodox communities and their life. And when I was watching the two series I will focus on today, which is Shtisel and Unorthodox, I had the feeling that those series are clearly much more about our modern societies and the challenges we are facing and the anxieties we are dealing with than about the other, so to say. And I try in my lecture, I try primarily to explain why I think that this is the case. And from a kind of methodological perspective, I'm primarily looking at intertextual references in both of these series, especially intermediate forms of intermediation, or the way how the series use media and reflect about media. And actually, especially in the case of Shtisel, this will be just a very, very, very small glimpse, because I think you can watch Shtisel completely from the perspective of media, the use of different media, from telephone to radio to television and so on and so on. And you will learn a lot about forms of communication, especially then also in this specific connection to kind of to religious communication and media theory, so to say. And the second aspect, the second approach is through kind of forms of self-reflexivity, and both, of course, as you can imagine, are somehow interconnected. That's also why I want to start with I have several clips from the series, from both of them. So I think most part of my lecture will be watching clips. I hope this is fine for you, and I hope that my internet is stable enough that you will enjoy that. While saying that, I will stop screen sharing again, and just to be sure that I exactly optimize it for the video clips and share also my computer sound, and now it should work. Yeah, now I don't see you, and I don't know why, but this has maybe other reasons. Okay, so I will show you now a clip from the third season of Shtisel. Shtisel, as it was said, is today available on the streaming platform Netflix, but it started on Israeli television. It's an Israeli television series about, as Kinga already said, about an ultra-Orthodox Haredi family in a Jerusalem neighborhood. It's really a family saga, and this is from the last and latest season, the third season, and it's focusing on Lippe and Gitti Weiss, the daughter of the main protagonist, Shtisel, and her husband. And maybe you should know, if you don't know the series so well, that Lippe in the first series, he somehow kind of left the community, also left Israel, and then he returned. He's always this guy who's very humane, but on the other hand, also is really curious about the world and about the possibility to develop himself, to reach goal, to innovate, and also of course to earn money and change his status. And in this episode, it's about the fact that Lippe works for television production, which is actually filming a series about Haredi communities, and he's trying to get extras for this production. So I hope you can hear and see. If not, then please somebody open the microphone and tell me.
סליחה, ליפה.
שטויות. עוד פעם צדקת, זה הכל. נמאסתי כבר מעצמי לגמרי, תאמיני לי. אפילו 5 חבר'ה לא הצלחתי למצוא. עוד פעם צדקת ועוד פעם נכשלתי, זה הכל.
אל תגיד את זה. הלב שלך טוב וגדול ובוער, ואני כל הזמן רק מחבר אותו. אני לא רוצה שתוותר. יש לי רעיון.
שלום לכם, שולם עליכם. יש לכם זקנים מאוד יפים, ואני מחפש אנשים זקנים בשביל להצטלם לתוכנית טלוויזיה. מעניין אתכם? שלום חבר'ה. אתם בעניין של להצטלם לסדרה, טלוויזיה, מקבלים כסף טוב.
מה זה כסף טוב?
200 שקל לחצי יום צילום.
וואלה, איזה סדרה?
לא יודע, אבל יש כסף, זה מה שחשוב.
מה צריך לעשות?
שום דבר, אתם פשוט צריכים לבוא מחר ב-5 בבוקר לכתובת הזאת, אנחנו כבר נאסוף אתכם משם.
יאללה, אנחנו בעניין.
מצוין. כולם צריכים להיות עם שיער קצר וזקן ארוך, בסדר?
בטח, הגעת לבר של היפסטרים, אחי.
מה זה היפסטרים? תגיד לי, הנאץ הזה שיש לך באוזן, יכול להעיף אותו? זה מאוד חשוב. אתה יכול להוריד את הקוף?
I think this scene is interesting on several levels. First of all, it shows the kind of the basic focus of the series, that it's really kind of focusing on the private and personal life of the protagonists, that it's very much about kind of love, relationships, family, and all these very universal topics and issues, which is quite important because what we see is this tendency of depicting Haredi and ultra-Orthodox life without kind of delving into the political and controversial and political dimensions of it. And thereby, of course, the series from the beginning connects to the ordinary as well as secular people. Second, it is quite interesting because it shows this intersection, that this merging of the different worlds of the home, of course, and the public, but also in this case the shift towards the secular Tel Aviv. And as you see now, because Lippe failed to find ultra-Orthodox extras, he's going to this Tel Avivian guys with the long beards to ask them to perform Haredi Jews. And thereby, of course, the series already starts to reflect about this issue: who is playing whom, who is impersonating whom, what is the original, the real Haredi, especially when it comes to a television series. And here I already see the self-reflexive element that reminds us of watching a series, and of course also engaging into a world that is a reflection of social circumstances and topics that are more connected to us than to this kind of exotic other. And this moment of irritation about the concept of hipster and hipsterim, of course, is also quite interesting here, because it also shows kind of similarities and connecting points, the beards, and also very different cultural concepts. So this is how this kind of culminates then in a later scene.
מה יש לך ברזה?
תגיל, מה?
לא, תוריד את זה, זה לא שייך, צדיק. תוריד את זה, תוריד. גם אתה, צדיק, תוריד את זה.
גם אני?
ברור, מה זה הדבר הזה? מה זה, מה יש לך על הראש? שיער. לא, זה שיער של ילדה, אתה צריך להחביא את זה, תשים את הכובע על הראש ואל תוריד אותו, שלא יראו את זה. בסדר גמור. יופי. אז הכי טוב שלא תדברו עם אף אחד. בטח לא תגידו שאתם לא חרדים. בלי צחוקים, בלי להתחיל עם בחורות,
מה שתגיד, העיקר שאין לנו בסוף היום קש,
בסדר, בסדר. חברים, אם מישהו מדבר איתכם, אתם אומרים לו, אנחנו בטייניס דיבור. שזה כאילו תענית דיבור. אתם ניצבים, אתם לא אמורים לדבר. תגידו כולם, טייניס דיבור! טייניס דיבור! שכוח, טייניס דיבור! טייניס דיבור! טייניס דיבור! טייניס דיבור!
And here we already see this kind of this playing with imitation, with impersonation, with with difference and similarity, which creates this moment of connection, and also then also a building of a kind of new community, and as I said, which helps, so to say, to understand that it is quite difficult here to identify, so to say, really the other, because it's always the self which we are encountering and seeing in this presumed other. Yeah, so of course, what is the relevance of this whole thing? So I think when we talk about Haredi communities, ultra-Orthodoxy, we first of all have to recognize they are there to stay. They are an important factor, at least in Israel, as you might have seen in the last elections. On the right here, you see also a new television show, which is directed by Rama Burstein, herself, coming from an Haredi background, a television show that will air at the end of this year. Of course, the representation of Jewish religion in at least Israeli visual culture is not a new phenomenon, but we definitely saw an interesting transformation or interesting developments in the way how how Jewish religion, and especially also Orthodoxy, is depicted and represented. And when we kind of look back to a classic like Amos Gitai's Kadosh, which still, so to say, really kind of explores this world as something different and other from the secular mainstream, or then already a film like Eyes Wide Open that is focusing on the topic also of homosexuality with regards to religious communities in Israel. And I think the groundbreaking film by Rama Burstein, Fill the Void, which was celebrated, of course, also as a first version of a mainstream film that gained some insight into the community from a first-person experience. Then we see that the representation of Jewish religion and of Orthodoxy, on the one hand, became kind of more precise, and you can say maybe authentic, but more important, I think, we see that it turns from a political topic to a topic that is much more about reflecting, so to say, the basic elements of society, like family, like gender relations, like the question of power relations, and in a certain way, this abstaining from the political dimension of religion in the Israeli context also reflects, from my perspective, a desire, especially from the Israeli audiences, to kind of step back from the dominance of politics in Israeli life, so that actually the films about religion are also kind of a bit of a relief in comparison to films that reflect, for example, on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. On television, the representation of ultra-Orthodox Jews started in a certain way to offer new ways and to include more perspectives. Pelek describes this really as a development in which two series, A Touch Away and Tzrugim, had an important effect on preparing the ground for a number of successors that kind of more and more made it a kind of normal environment to tell these kind of stories. So as he says, both Touch Away and Tzrugim opened the way to a number of religion-themed shows, which have since become on Israeli TV. Most, if not all of them, adopted Tzrugim's innovation and keep religion separated from the controversial political connotations it has in Israel, as I said. So I want to focus on Netflix. As Kinga said, kind of one representative of the new streaming culture. So only one of several platforms, but a platform that somehow kind of in a specific way engaged or prepared the floor for this particular genre of kind of films about orthodoxy, Haredi life. It started with the documentary film One of Us in 2017. Shtisel, that already aired on Israeli television in 2013, was available on the platforms, is available since 2018, and then the miniseries Unorthodox that aired on the platform just coincidentally when the lockdown started in 2020, gained additional attention to this particular topic. And I think, of course, Netflix as a specific medium that offers us also the possibility of watching series in a different way than before, to kind of decode in a different way the multipath narration strategies of these kind of television series, that somehow kind of even goes furthermore, like the television that was already a family member and kind of brought the world into the private space, becomes a new way of kind of mobile and global cultural reflection. I think it's not a coincidence, or there is an interesting connection we might already like to discuss about between Netflix and this particular way of kind of depicting this presumably exotic communities in the way these series do. Yeah. So turning towards Shtisel, as I already said, it started on Israeli television in 2013, and is really kind of a family saga with until now three seasons, and in the focus, as I said, Shulem Shtisel, here in the center of this family tree, or also in the center of the sitting there at the kitchen table, who at the beginning of the series loses his wife Dvora and really has difficulties to kind of get over it. And the second protagonist somehow is Akiva, his son, a bachelor, and his kind of exploring of himself and especially also love and also his siblings, specifically Gitti and Lippe, whom you already met, and Zvi and Tovi, and their extended families. And this is the interesting thing, that this idea of kind of having ultra-Orthodox people as ordinary people means that what we are dealing with are primarily kind of normal topics. So love is in the center, family problems are in the center, and also other questions that kind of that make it similar, so to say, to what we described as soap operas or family sagas on television. And this is actually the first element that should make us curious with regards to, are we actually really watching or learning about the ultra-Orthodox community here, or is this a form of alienation, so to say, of distancing us in order to reflect about us and ourselves? Because if you take into consideration famous series of the 80s or so, like Dallas or Denver Clan, it was never kind of people like us which we admire watching on television, but it was always the other, the rich, the different people, and somehow the ultra-Orthodox now play this role for us. The other aspect is that Shtisel reflects kind of constantly about looking and about gazes and about perspectives. Akiva is a painter, so he's painting portraits. So it's always also about reflecting about the image and the person and the relation between image and person, and also the fantasies and the desires that are related to that. And I will, in a minute, start speaking about the whole television discourse, which is part of the first season of the series. But first, I want to briefly show this short clip, because although it is about kind of a family dispute of Shulem with his other daughter that somehow kind of left the family and moved up north, he says a very interesting thing here at the end of this sequence.
אבא, אתה שומע? אני לא רוצה שתטעה כאן. אני לא הולכת לבטל את הדין תורה, אלא אם כן אתה בא ללמוד עם הילדים פעם בשבוע תורה.
הדין תורה שלך זה קשקוש, זה שום דבר. תשאלי את זייבה.
את מי?
לא חשוב. בסדר. נעשה את זה פעם בשבועיים בלי נדר. הכל תלוי לאיזה צד מסתכלים.
I think this is again a quite interesting scene, and of course I was referring to kind of Shulem turning around and saying it depends on how you look at it. And if you kind of saw this conversation with his daughter, you saw that he first was looking into the direction of a cemetery, and then he's turning and then he's looking towards the sea. So we have on the one hand this reflection about kind of, it depends on the way you look at it. So you can turn and you can gain a different perspective and you can look differently on things. And it is also on this kind of this contrast between the cemetery and the sea, the life, and all the kind of desires and dreams related to that. And of course, then also the superimposition, which is a very specific cinematic technique that somehow connects the father and the son through the water and the flooding. And then we have, of course, all the references to the mikveh and also to purity and so on. And then the next shot to the train and the travel and the journey. a lot of things are kind of condensed in this and reflect, so to say, the whole kind of symbolism that is typical for this series. As I said before, television itself plays a huge role in Shtisel, and this is really, really interesting. This a part of the story is primarily connected to Shulem's mother, who is living in a home for the elderly and becomes a television, or gets a television, sorry.
שלום, שלום. כאן בבקשה. Alle Zimmer oben, du hast ein Kästel, aber kein bestellt.
Bist sicher, dass du willst oben eine Sache bei dir im Zimmer?
Sicher. Nacht noch habe ich geguckt in den Keller von Rebetzin Erblich. Sie gewähnen als eine schöne doch nicht. Kinderlich singen. Und sie gewähnen dort ein Bestin von München, wo sie eine Maßbirde kinderlich wer soll zu singen. Sehr schön. Ich gewähnen dort ein Engel. Hat gesungen. Sind mir gekommen, Tränen in die Augen. Ich habe sich der Mann in unser 2 Jahre, wie fliegt singen schön.
הנה גברת, צריכה לדעת רק 3 כפתורים. זה הכפתור שמחבב ומדליק. פה עם הכפתור הזה את מעבירה ערוצים, וזה הווליום, חלש וחזק.
תודה.
בבקשה.
ריבונו של עולם, היום הכל יש.
אישה שכל החיים שלה קוראת סינרלה, שכל שנה בוכה בפרשה של מכירת יוסף. פתאום להכניס לטלוויזיה צבעונית.
So here we see, of course, from the narrative, on the narrative level, the TV is a kind of intruder. It is also creating a conflict with the religious life and with the religious traditions that are practiced. It doesn't really fit. On the other hand, it is also here an object that is strongly connected to emotion. And this, I think, is also emphasized then by the contrast that before that it was the Torah readings that kind of brought up this emotions, and now somehow it's this kastal which creates this personal connection. And for Shulem's mother, actually, the television really becomes this kind of a connection not only to the world out there, but also, of course, a form of reflecting her own life in this family. And for us, of course, it is a constant reminder that what is shown in the television are we, the seculars, so to say, and we are watched at by this nice old religious lady. So it's always kind of the whole watching situation is turned around. So this culminates then in this scene where Shulem's son Tzvi Aryeh, who is also mentioned in the first scene as having such a nice voice as a boy, visits his grandmother with a certain objective.
שלום בובי, אני מגיע עכשיו מהר המנוחס.
תראה מה זה שם באמריקה. לא כמו כאן, אצל החופשים שמגדלים ילד ושני כלבים. אתה רואה? אצלה משפחה 5 ילדים. ריץ', טורן, ביל, סמנטה, הבלונדינקה והכלב שלהם, אז זה שייפלה.
כן, יופי. אז מה את אומרת, אולי אני אזמין לנו טקסי וניסע ביחד לסעודה?
לא, צבי אריאל, אני אשאר כאן. זה בסדר. אני אהיה איתכם בלב שלי. אני כבר לא מה שהייתי. כבר לא כל כך פשוט לקום לצאת. גם אין לכם מעלית.
אני ראיתי בלובי שיש הרצאה של הרב נויגרשן. זה מעניין אותך?
רב נויגרשן, זה מהרדיו.
לא.
זה בא שם משהו. נותנים כאן דברים מאוד מעניינים.
אז בואי נלך. אני אלווה אותך. זה תכף מתחיל.
בסדר.
So here you see, on the one hand, so to say, that the series she's watching, The Young and the Restless, so to say, becomes a mirror for reflecting her and her own life, and thereby also kind of emphasizing the similarities, the number of children and things like that. And on the other hand, the next generation that kind of has the feeling that her grandmother, Saftar, kind of disconnects from them. And actually, this is again a quite universal motive, and we also have other reflections about that in the history of cinema. For example, maybe some of you know the film All That Heaven Allows. There is a very important scene where the children of the female protagonist give her a television in order to kind of offer her somebody to be with when they leave the house, but she decides not to go to the television, but falls in love with the gardener, the much younger gardener. And if you know a little bit about German film history, maybe you know Hier Eats Soul by Rainer Werner Fassbinder, where he's kind of using this motive, or the classical melodramatic motive, and turns it around when the children, when they learn about a love affair of their old mother with a much younger North African guest worker, kind of start hitting the television screen. So also this aggressions against this apparatus, so to say. This episode ends with this, and here you have also the conflict between two media. You see here the radio, or the tape recorder, from which they are playing this song of young Zvi Arie with his beautiful voice, which his grandmother mentioned before. And then you see, so to say, the Saftar Shtisel in front of the TV that doesn't work anymore. So this whole discourse about the television as the intruder on the narrative level, but also as a form of reflecting the whole notion of kind of what are we seeing, who is looking at whom, which perspective do we have, what are we seeing in this particular series, is then completely kind of transformed into a self-reflexive arrangement at the end of the first season, when the grandmother is in hospital and everyone is afraid that she will die. And this is then also the cliffhanger of the series, but it's quite interesting how this season ends.
Marcele, rustig, mag niet meer. Gisteren, wat blijft doen?
So in these last scenes, the TV series Shtisel in the inner diegetic world turns into a TV series watched at from heaven, and thereby kind of offering us a key, so to say, how to decipher this subtext about the soap opera which Savta Shtisel is watching constantly, and also this reflection about us as the viewers that are sitting there somebody outside and watching the presumably other, which is actually, so to say, we. So coming from this kind of interpretation of Shtisel, it is interesting to look at a series that, of course, has lacks or has not the same kind of form of intertextual or self-reflexive media discourse embedded in it. So Unorthodox, based on the book and experiences of Dora Feldman, and who left the Haredi community of the Satmars in New York, and so based on that that book. Sorry, the phone is ringing in the back and I can't stop it. But so based on that book, Unorthodox is of course a clear kind of has a clear political perspective, and it is usually also interpreted as a clear as creating a very clear cut between these two different worlds: the Satmar community in New York and the secular world. And of course, it also kind of was always perceived as a classical escape story. And that was also the reason why people had the feeling that there are a lot of kind of stereotypes are reproduced, although the producers themselves said that they really tried to present as accurate as possible what this religious background. I again want to take a different perspective on this. And again, maybe this quote can help us, that this departure from the biographical story allows Unorthodox to focus less on the Satmar community and more on Esti, with the name of the protagonist in the Netflix series, discovering herself as powerful and independent young woman. And so we see a kind of constant process of transformation, which is not a process of replacement. It's not about kind of replacing one part of the biography with the other part, but it's a constant form of kind of expanding that perspectives, and this shot in the center showing Esti and her husband in Berlin in front of the Humboldt Forum, which is this kind of rebuilt imperial palace, and of course all the notions connected to that, to German history, to colonialism and so on, shows us, so to say, a very entangled perspective, which also corresponds to the narrative structure of the series, where different narrative strands blend different places, times, and also cultures into each other. So this quite long scene, I will maybe jump in between a little bit, shows us how this kind of blending of different time levels and spaces and also cultures work, and how this still shows us, despite all the pain related to it, that there is this kind of this important basis of having this cultural, religious, and also historical background that kind of defines also the protagonist, and which also is something the others learn from, because what we see in the first part here is a constant kind of learning, typically about through food, which is usually one of the spheres where intercultural encounters can happen.
How can I help?
So this is Esti already.
Rescue Robert's attempt at a salad. Oh.
So this is Esti in Berlin, where she met kind of a community of musicians and is somehow invited to them. And yeah, and you will see that most of her story is then told in flashbacks.
You any good with dressing?
I'm okay. I cook a lot at home.
There you go, ma'am. So what do you cook at home?
Everything. Soups, kigel, chunt, goulash, cakes.
Chunt? Kuchi? What's that?
It's like kigel is.
Oh, you know it?
Yeah, kigel is like a cake made of noodles, and it's like sweet and spicy. And
it's hard to explain. It's just a normal Jewish.
Like Jewish food.
Yes. Yeah, I learned everything from my babi.
What's a babi?
It's my grandmother. She raised me.
Robert was raised by his grandparents too.
Yeah.
Oh, they also live in Berlin?
No, they did. Passed away.
I'm sorry.
You escaped, didn't you?
You make it sound like I was in prison.
Weren't you?
No. But I left without telling anyone where I was going.
Why did you leave?
This is not a job interview, okay?
It's okay. God expected too much of me. Now I need to find my own path.
Well, I'll drink to that.
Definitely, yeah. Wine, yeah. Do you have a glass? Yeah, to Esti. To Esti. L'chaim.
Yeah.
L'chaim. The only thing mine. Yeah.
Wo Kedisches hat mir schlitte wird mir kein sein der heilige Mitzvah von Kaitzad meragdim lifnai hakale in des Schiss von alle seine heilige Uwes Wellen Hussen Kalle kriegen Haspus Teuwes und alle wollen tanzen wie Meiri wie meine a kegen Mashiach zit keine ay 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 ay
So an emotionally very dense scene where you see how kind of the different narrative paths are interwoven and connected also as flashbacks or as kind of different time levels that kind of tell Esti's background. Of course, there are also connections, the connection through family, the connection through celebration. There's also in the secular world this kind of Jewish traditions, cultures, also the continuous believing in God that are also present there, but also the pain as seen here. So as I want to argue, it is not this idea of kind of one positive, enlightened, free world is kind of opposite to a world that is frightening and oppressive, but that this is interwoven, and that again there is a very strong universal dimension here that is also taking the particularity of the biographical experience on a level where it kind of interconnects in a multi-directional way with others, and I'm here referring, for example, to Turkish German cinema, very famous Fatih Akin's Head On, where we have kind of similar escape stories, similar kind of interwoven narratives that tell this kind of this double belonging, so to say, and this shifting between the different worlds that still are connected and that cannot be separated. So that turning unorthodox into, as here in this quote, a period drama about a conservative community, which is still relatable for many others who suffer from rigid social norms in various cultures and those who yearn for change. And this is the interesting kind of way how intercultural and also intertextual references in unorthodox help us to better understand that this is not about the other, but about a world in which we are living and from which we are part, and a history and cultures that are connected with others. And especially the historical discourse here is quite important. And we have several scenes. We can interpret actually the shaving of the head itself as an historical reference that resonates to the famous images we have from the Jewish prisoners in concentration and extermination camps. And we have a central scene that takes place at the Wannsee in Berlin. And again, I jump a little bit through it just that you get it, because it's really an important scene, because it's also kind of the primary transformation scene of Esti, but it is also kind of connecting it to Germany and to German history, and also shows us again that the series has a lot of us, yeah, from the speaking from the perspective of the German audience, for example. So she goes to the Wannsee with her friends.
Now you can swim as far as 1942. But did you see that villa? The conference where the Nazis decided to kill the Jews in concentration camps took place in 1942, in that villa.
Can you swim in this lake?
Oh, the lake is just a lake. There's more, actually. When the Berlin Wall was up, East German guards shot anyone who tried to swim across this lake to freedom.
And now?
Now you can swim as far as you like.
So as you see, again, several levels kind of intersect with the others, the history that is present at this particular place, the reference to the Wannsee conference, but the lake that is only a lake, and then also the Wannsee as a kind of a space for transformation that is also kind of purification in the sense of a bath in the mikveh. Of course, you can also relate it to baptism, but you can also kind of also this kind of transformation by taking away the wig, again, seeing her with the shaved hair. So I would argue that there are kind of a lot of levels and references that kind of create a very complex image, and that shows that this kind of everyday life, which is so close to ours, is always kind of has always another another level and another meaning and another reference, which we won't see if not Esti would help us to see it, to understand it. So maybe this is a good last example I want to show you, a normal kind of visit to a club. But again, we have this moment where kind of his historical memory pops up. So this ordinary gesture of showing the stamp for entering the club, for Esti, it's not an ordinary gesture, and also we as the audience immediately kind of get this resonance to the tattoos which prisoners got in Auschwitz and so on, and showed later to the camera of the liberators. So that's what I want to argue, that there is always a kind of another layer that is so close and so closely connected to us, that actually in these films we see much more the encounter with ourselves, with our history, with our struggles, with our anxieties, than that this is really about kind of the other, and thereby offers us also a kind of a different perspective that emphasizes the interconnectedness between worlds that we usually fantasize as separated, but that might be much closer than we thought. I leave it here because I'm already over time. I had kind of, as a kind of epilogue, I wanted to show you some TikTok videos about religion, Jewish and Yiddish culture that might be an interesting, create interesting connections. Maybe I can do that in the discussion, but I would really like now also to hear your comments and to engage into a discussion. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yes, thank you very much, Tobias, for your absolutely fascinating talk. And just out of my deep desire not to be rude, I'm going to keep my questions for later. So what we're going to do now is we will open the floor for questions, and we're going to do this in a bit of an organized manner. So anybody who would like to ask Tobias about one of the facets of his talk that really pointed out the complexity of televised or audiovisual representation of orthodoxy. If you could please put your name in the general chat, and I will provide some space and time for you to ask your questions, and of course for Tobias to answer. So anybody who would like to ask something, please put your name in the chat, and then we can start, hopefully, interesting discussion. And thanks again, Tobias. It was really absolutely mind-blowing, if I may say so. Very, very interesting perspective on films I'm very familiar with and that I've just completely seen from a very different angle now. So thank you.
Thank you.
So the floor is open for questions. Yes, we've got Christina.
Okay, I hope it's not rude if I start. I wanted to ask about the target audiences of the different series and films that you said. What kind of difference does that make to the plot? And I also wanted to ask a little more about what we know about the producers. What milieu do they come from? And then lastly, can we say anything about reception? Are there viewer numbers, for example?
Yeah, so I cannot really answer all these questions, very, very important questions in a very competent way, again, because I'm not an expert for this topic, but came to it really more out of curiosity. But of course, this is very important when we kind of further delve into a better understanding. So the target audience, and this is, I think, very important, is of course definitely in case of Shtisel, first an Israeli and then very soon a global, and in case of Unorthodox, a global, a little bit also German audience, secular, not religious, and in case of Unorthodox, I think also to a huge extent non-Jewish, and the same is true, so to say, for the cast and directors. So other than this new coming series Fire Dance by Rama Burstein, we don't have kind of Haredi or Orthodox directors here. Nevertheless, Shtisel, as I said before, was different from earlier depictions where the Orthodox were kind of used as a kind of projection screen for dealing with controversial topics like homosexuality, gender things, and so on. Shtisel kind of shifts away from that and kind of tells us these kind of ordinary stories and turns the Orthodox, as I said, into ordinary people, still not aiming towards an Orthodox audience. This has, of course, also a lot to do with the way how Haredi communities relate to television, to modern communication media, and things like that. And this is also why I come to this conclusion that, of course, also because the series is not aiming to other audiences than secular or moderate religious audiences, it's like all other television series, more about finding something that looks different but gives us a possibility to learn something about ourselves. But what is interesting, of course, here is still that there is money in on the funding level from religious institutions that want to foster a kind of bridging between secular and religious parts of the Israeli society, and also want to foster different kind of understanding of different streams of Judaism. So all of these religious TV series in Israel get some funding from that, so that they also have this aim and this dimension. Unorthodox might be a little bit different, and this creates also a lot of the controversy that was around this series because it has also this German background. Nevertheless, I would say Maria Schrader, she showed already before her interest in similar topics and so on. Of course, the whole kind of feminist gender elements that are important for the series. But that's why I said what's interesting is to look at Unorthodox, for example, more in context of films by Fatih Akin, like Head On and others, than to look at it from the perspective of kind of an accurate representation of the Satmar community in New York. With regards to reception, I don't have any figures, but both series were really successful globally. So Shtisel was a hit in Israel among all sectors of the society, or at least all sectors that are watching television series either on TV or on streaming services. But also globally, especially since it was then kind of brought on Netflix. And I found it quite interesting, this really interesting documentary, Netflix documentary, One of Us, about kind of three Haredi kind of expellees, I don't know, so escapees from Haredi communities that somehow prepared the floor, and then they bought Shtisel, and then they produced Unorthodox. So it might not be a coincidence. Yeah, this has also to do first. What Netflix was a streaming platform, but then it became a producer itself. Yeah, and of course they are very interested. Like we can also see that with many social media platforms now. They're interested in fostering diversity, so to say. Yeah, so diversity is the key. Yeah, we can argue because it's also about getting other audiences, audiences that pay and that you can attach to your platform, but that's also the reason why potentially everything should be kind of included, so to say, by these streaming services. And all the other questions, really, I'm not an expert on both of the series, but there's already some academic research and publications available.
Okay, thank you,
Julia
Tobias.
put her name on the chat, so I say this so that she doesn't need to say it.
Thank you. You spared me the embarrassment of kind of jumping the queue. I've got many questions, but I'll try to focus on two. The first is, you know, when I watched this series, I always had at the back of my mind this idea by Ian Ang, this emotional realism. And I have the impression, just also based upon skimming comments about the program a little bit on social media platforms, that this is something that pulls the audiences in. And I wonder whether that is a trope we can find across other productions with that showcase communities that are in a way very specific and, as you said, you know, to the external viewer, exotic. Because Netflix tends to do that with, for example, Polish television programs, where there's also things that are totally alien to somebody who doesn't know the cultural context, but then sees the emotions and, you know, the relationships that are very kind of classical, similar in crime films, for example, to Scandinavian cinema. I was wondering, is that something that's happening here as well? And does it overwrite the specific nuanced reading that I can totally see from an informed perspective for the ordinary viewer? Is it soap opera that people desire when they watch these programs? And beautiful soap opera, that is. I mean, the aesthetics is another thing that I think are quite powerful here, and the poetic imagery. Yes, and the second question would be whether there's any research you're aware of on the representation of Orthodox communities in specific national cinemas, like, for example, the British community. Do we know about the difference already? Do we see different visuals? Do we see different emphasis on maybe completely different issues?
Wow. Okay, I try at least to answer a little bit. I think this is an interesting and important observation, and I think this is part of this concept of global streaming platforms, that they somehow try to combine transcultural global aesthetics with kind of a local flair, so to say, and that this somehow also creates this notion of this poetic realism, or also of this ability to kind of connect to these stories on both levels. So that it's a transgression of national kind of television, but not in the sense that we have kind of completely globalized aesthetics here. However, this, I think, is a tendency which we see, which we saw already also in cinema, and that also shows us that we have a constant blurring between television and cinema through these platforms, because somehow we can also say that some of these series are really more like extended dramas than that they have the classic episodic structure of television series before the digital age. And this interconnection of kind of the global and the local, or the kind of author element and the kind of popular culture elements, I think are very typical for nearly all of the productions, including more and more also the American productions. Shtisel, I think, nevertheless, we need to treat a little bit different, because the first 2 seasons were produced by Israeli television alone, so to say, and it was really an Israeli television series, although Israeli television at that time was already kind of aiming towards global audiences and things like that. I think this would be really interesting to look, to do some more research, so to say, what is Shtisel before went on Netflix and after. So the 3rd season, I think, first on Netflix, and I think from a viewer's perspective, there are interesting also aesthetic and narrative differences between the third season and the first two seasons. But this needs more research, and then maybe we can also find out what might be the difference. With Unorthodox, I think it's really a typical example of kind of a Netflix production for a global audience with a local flair, with transcultural and elements and some kind of political but not too controversial political elements. Nevertheless, I would still consider this series also as part of the German Netflix series, so to say, because Berlin plays such an important role, because you really see and feel the role the German director and producers and others played here. And as I said, and these historical references, which really are so important in order to understand it, and which turns it really more into a series that is reflecting about what is the place of Jews in Germany, in the new Germany, what is this kind of entangled history we are dealing with. I think this should not be underestimated. And of course, this focus on Satmar and so on, yeah, it somehow kind of overshadows this part in this dimension, that the parts in Berlin are not less conflicting, so to say, than the parts that are set in Brooklyn. The second question, actually, I see that Daniel has raised his virtual hand, so he might know much better about the representation of Jews and also Orthodox Jews in different television and visual cultures. I'm really not an expert on that. I just follow that out of curiosity and can only say something about Israel and about Germany with this regard. So I really don't know the UK scene so well. And that would, of course, also be interesting to look how far these popular images of Haredi Jews, first coming from Israel and then kind of through Unorthodox, how this affected the way how this of later representations in other audiovisual cultures.
Okay, thank you, Tobias. So now to Daniel.
Okay, hi everybody from Berlin. And my question, Tobias, has a bit to do with, if you could tell us a bit more about this relationship between Haredim and the series. You know, there are a lot of stories going around, or used to go around during the first two seasons. And these relationships are really quite complicated. On one hand, who were the producers and script writers? You know, I, for example, know one of the script writers for the third season. He's also ex-Haredi. And now he tries to become a historian, does a PhD, and the Leo Baeck Fellowship supported him. So some kind of a repeating story that dropouts are going to produce TV series about Haredim, but the stories which go around are super interesting. And there seems something to happen within the Haredi society which goes against certain core beliefs, but maybe I'm wrong. I'll give you some examples. You know, when they did the first season, they had to work with hidden cameras. They didn't have to work with hidden cameras when they were shooting the second seasons, because among Haredi society, the series became quite popular. And there's, for example, one example, I never could prove it, but this was told to me. I think there's a marriage going on. They showcased a marriage in the first season, and they invented a nigun, you know, a marriage nigun, a marriage melody, complete invention.
Yeah.
But this nigun became really popular then among the Haredi society. So this invention left TV, jumped into the Haredi society, and became something real, right? Or the third example is, I was told that Haredi men, not females, men were trying to get in touch with the producers to appear in the show, you know, cameo appearance, to say one sentence or just to look into the camera, which is also something which goes against all the basic, or the very many basic rules which are present within Haredi society. And the fourth thing is, as you know, there are two kind of phones within Haredi society, the kosher ones and non-kosher ones. And there are a lot of WhatsApp groups, which you can access by the non-kosher ones. And during the first 2 seasons, there were special WhatsApp groups about Shtisel, and they were exchanging information, they shared information how to watch it. As not just go to the National Library, as they used to do in my time when I was in Jerusalem, but also other ways. Do you know about other stories? And what does this say about the relationship between Haredi society and mainstream Israel?
A very good question, and I have to say that I don't know. And from the research literature which I found, which was limited actually to the English research literature, there was also nobody really elaborating about these findings which you refer to. But I would say that that in particular the scene about the extras, which I showed you in the beginning, which is also before that he's talking with several people who are answering his phone, and it's really funny because you see really a kind of a panorama of kind of different Haredi Orthodox, modern Orthodox potential responses. I think this is already kind of informed by the experiences which the producers, the crew, everybody had already made. So I'm not surprised, though I don't think that was an intention of the series, but it shows again that these kind of similarly strict or separate boundaries between the different sectors in the Israeli society are maybe not so strict and as we assume from certain kind of public perception and media reception, which is, by the way, also true when we are talking about the separation between the Israeli and the Palestinian, or the Israeli and the Arab Palestinian society. So things are much on an everyday level, and especially when it comes to cultural exchange or to media use, things are much more entangled than we are usually assuming from this perspective of kind of from the outside perspective. Again, I was on purpose kind of taking this perception of analyzing the series more as something mirroring the kind of the non-Orthodox, and because I don't feel comfortable to say something about the effects, the receptions, and the way how this kind of relates actually to the Haredi society. What I think what is quite interesting definitely is that that the status also from dropouts, so to say, or from people who transgress the borders between the Haredi and the secular or non-Haredi world, changed over the last years, and that this might also connect to the series, that actually we have to. So it's not surprising what the story you tell, that people then go into the script writing business or become researchers. We also have more and more students who have a Haredi background and are kind of and left the community. We know, for example, that the military is very interested in ex-Haredis because of their high training in reading and understanding complex scripture. For example, for codes and for decoding codes and things like that. Often ex-Haredis are and also Haredis who join the military, which is, by the way, also some people do that despite all the conflicts around that. So this is quite an interesting thing, but I have to say that I'm really not an expert in this. But all these anecdotes you tell are very interesting, and I think also they are quite believable and show, so to say, that there is this kind of intersection and this kind of dialogue, which has also to do with these kind of cultural products. A follow-up question by Daniel.
May I?
Yes, of course. Nobody. Sorry, it's not my.
It's fine, perfectly fine, Tobias.
My feeling is, but I might be wrong. You know, my feeling is. I mean, most of these stories I know from interviews with the directors and scriptwriters. And my feeling is that in some way, I'm not quite understand. Shtisel seems to build a bridge between, I'm not quite sure if this was the aim, maybe this was part of their aims, a bridge between the Haredi society, whoever belongs to the Haredi society, and the non-Haredi society, which means the non-Orthodox society, Jewish society in Israel. And they're trying to do it by showing these families as normal people, right? Yeah, as you told us. Now, this is completely different with the other book or the other TV series. I'm not quite sure if the other book or the other TV series try to build a bridge between these ultra-Haredis and not the Jewish society, the non-Jewish society.
Yeah,
is
so
not in a certain way problematic, or am I wrong about to put these two series in such an opposition?
I tend not to create such a hard opposition between Shtisel and Unorthodox, which is quite common. So usually it is said Shtisel has this kind of more embracing, kind of bridging the separation, while Unorthodox is kind of cementing it in a certain way. I think this is true for the book, especially the whole political discourse around the book, and maybe also the way how Deborah Feldman herself kind of emphasized her story. I think it is different with the series, and I tried to argue that this can be seen in the specific aesthetics of the series, because if you really look into it, the whole narrative is a complete kind of entangled narrative. You have no kind of clear kind of, it's not this kind of clear, I cut from one to the other. Usually both are not connected through kind of contrasts or things like that, but they are usually connected by, like I said, showed in this one scene. Yeah, so we have a celebration and a kind of new family, and then it goes back to a celebration and the family, so to say. And also when we see this wedding, maybe I didn't show it perfectly because I had to jump a little bit. You also see this connection, this when they touch, yeah, they do it. There's fear and everything, but it's not rejection. And you also have this whole kind of, the series, it doesn't reject the Satmar world, at least not kind of her husband, so to say. Yeah, you see also he also transforms in the encounter with Berlin. Maybe the more critical thing is Berlin, and the way that the series suggests somehow that Berlin could provide a third space, so to say, where this can be negotiated. But again, I also showed that Berlin, of course, is also shown as a contaminated space in some of the yeah. So I don't know. So I would not be so strict, but from the tendency, I think you're totally right. Yeah, and this has to do with what you said. So this Shtisel on purpose wanted to be non-political, and it really on purpose went towards this universal topics of love, family, and all these kind of things everybody can adjust to, and showing the Haredi as ordinary people. And by that, of course, also teaching us something about specific customs, traditions of the culture. Yeah, you can learn something, of course, about Haredi life. Unorthodox is, of course, about kind of an emancipation process of a woman. It has a political dimension, and so on and so on. But I would not say that the series is kind of showing this Jewish this ultra-Orthodox community as singular or unique in this sense. I think again there's a universal story, and this is the universal story of rejecting any kind of this kind of suppression and suppressing freedom. And that's why I connected it. And I'm not the only one. There are research papers already written about the similarities of unorthodox and German-Turkish cinema, for example. That there are a lot of tropes that kind of are very similar. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Tobias. Do we have any further questions from the audience? Okay, so I would like to say thank you to
I think Daniel wanted to come in.
Daniel, okay.
Again. Sorry.
Do we
You didn't put your name in the chat.
Oh, sorry. Do we still have time, Kinga?
Yes, yeah, sure. Yes, please.
No, Tobias, you just, in your answer, you just made a point of saying that Shtisel is not political. I would go the other way around. I would say Shtisel is extremely political by trying to build a bridge. And this goes to a core problem of our society at the moment. And of course, the question is different in Israel than maybe in Berlin or in Italy or in Hungary or in the United Kingdom. How do we deal with ultra-orthodoxy? And there are different answers here. And I can't give you the right answer. Maybe there is no right answer. But this question goes in Israel to the core of society and the core of politics.
Yeah, so that was definitely not the definition of politics, by the way. Also, this is not from me, but from Nir Pelek and his extensive research on yeah. So but it is about the serious on purpose, other than films, for example, that emphasize the role of women in the ultra-Orthodox community, or the homophobia in the ultra-Orthodox community, or the way how the ultra-Orthodox community is not accepting Israeli authority or things like that. All these topics don't play an important role in Shtisel. That is the way how it is unpolitical. Yeah, they didn't want to engage into all the controversial topics concerning ultra-Orthodox politics. Yeah, but in doing so, I totally agree with you. It's political in the sense that and that's why I started my presentation after the scene with a reference to the last elections. Yeah, so they are there to stay. Yeah, Ben-Gurion had this idea, and that's why he gave all the favors to the ultra-Orthodox community, that this will be a dying community. Yeah, that a few years after the birth of the state of Israel, there will no Orthodox anymore in Israel. And now they are a strong minority, and they might become a majority. And yeah, they are there to stay. And so it's a question how to deal, how to engage, and how to learn from each other, and how to draw also demarcation lines. And I don't know, yeah, and of course Shtisel at least plays an important role in kind of offering us a possibility to kind of relate to that world. Yeah, but again, I think in order to really to gain understanding, this means also that we see how much from what we already usually project to the Orthodox as the other is part of ourselves as well. Yeah, and this can also be connecting, because maybe we have similar problems to deal with and can learn from each other's solutions.
Okay.
Yeah, but I have also no answers like Daniel.
Okay. Yeah, then I'll ask again. Do we have any more follow-up questions? Anything you would like to address? Okay, I'll take a deep breath. Daniel, anything? No?
I have at least 2-3 other questions, but I'll let it go now.
Exactly. We will have follow-up events or meet hopefully at nice occasions, either in person in London or in Berlin, to continue this important discussion.
Yeah, because just one comment maybe at the end. I moved from London to Berlin 7 weeks ago. And it's a bit of a cultural shock. And I think here everybody's a bit nuts when it comes about Jews. And completely nuts, much more than 16 years ago. And whether this is good or bad is a difficult question to answer. And I'm not quite sure what kind of role plays the other TV series within this kind of very strange debates going on. But the debates about ultra-orthodoxy in Israel are different. It's not everybody's crazy in Israel, to put it bland, right? And what ultra-orthodoxy, doesn't matter what kind of ultra-orthodoxy. If it's just ultra-orthodox, with the black hat, or if it's about the Haredim and part of the Haredim, just say the ultra-orthodoxy do have a different role in debates about society and what kind of society should become Israel is very different than when you speak about the place of Jews in Germany. Sure. Right. And so there's a certain, maybe from my point of view, unease about the unorthodox, which I do not have about Shtisel, as long as it's shown in Israel. And
but this exactly is the thing, yeah. So through platforms like Netflix, this is not possible anymore. And this means, so to say, that so that there necessarily need to be debates about these kind of things. But again, I would also not be so monocausal. And this is also why I added this epilogue on TikTok and this fascinating phenomenon that on TikTok we see a huge diversity of Jewish religion. And that also we have also Jewish TikTokers in Germany who kind of share their everyday life customs and things like that, and people engage with that. And I think this is much more efficient in the way of creating a more diverse and more complex and also complicated idea of what a religious Jew is than both of the series can actually achieve. I understand your concerns, but I would always say, okay, to those people, you make it too easy if you receive the unorthodox film in the way that you can clearly say, look at these Jewish fundamentalists, because in this series, there are so many reminders about where German fundamentalism was leading to that you really, really need to want to overlook your own history and how far you are addressed in this series in order to kind of put everything on the other. That was actually what I wanted to say. But yeah, so maybe next time on TikTok and about TikTok, and then I try to make the argument why this is more efficient in creating a complex and complicated image of religion, of Jewish religion.
I think this is a very good point, and I would like to pick that up, Tobias. Talking about TikTok and future events, we certainly have to talk about that at some point. But for now, I would just like to say thank you to you and to everyone who joined us here tonight. And we will be, as ever, in touch with you shortly about our 2023 lecture series, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Myths, Images, and Imaginings about Jews. So watch this space, is what I want to say. There's more of interesting debate and fascinating talks to come. So thank you very much for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed this event. We certainly did enjoy Tobias' talk very much. I cannot hide that. There's no possible way. And I wish everyone a nice evening. And we hope we'll see you again soon, hopefully at the German Historical Institute. So we can go and discuss whatever we didn't discuss in the public debate over a coffee and a meal together. Thank you very much. And thank you, Christina, and to your team as well.
Thank you very much for hosting me and for this really nice discussion, and that you were really listening to a way too long talk. Thank you very much.